So when you can get this natural process working again, you don't need to buy so many inputs. Nitrogen, potash, phosphate, calcium, all that stuff is mostly right in our soil. You can really reduce it, and that helps your bottom line.
It's all locked there for us to use. Well, we are Ron and Maureen Bula, and we have been the owners and operators of Bula's Pleasant Valley Farm for about 35 years.
So actually the farm is very, very diversified. It's a little bit like farms of yesteryear. So we have cash crops, and we have livestock that entail cattle, beef cattle, grass-fed beef, Berkshire hogs, sheep, and broilers that are raised on pasture, as well as pasture-raised eggs. So we have a little bit of everything.
And then we also keep bees.
We also have bees.
And we also go back into the woods in February and March and use the woods to produce maple syrup.
So a little bit of everything. So we're not typical to most farming in this day and age, where people will specialize in dairy or cash crops or swine. But we have a small farm. We own 160 acres here, and we rent another 40, which in today's world is not a large farm. But because it's pretty intensive, Maureen operates a large organic garden here. And what all do you raise?
Oh gosh, everything from A to Z. We go from arugula to zucchini and just about everything in between. We're always willing to try something new. The flavors and things that come out of the gardens are amazing. And the gardens haven't seen any spray in over 35 years.
So I grew up on a large commercial vegetable farm, and we sprayed intensively every week with fungicides, pesticides, herbicides for most of the season. And I just didn't want to keep on using that when we moved down into the Baraboo area and started our own operation. So we decided to go a little more natural approach. And recently, people have started to practice something called regenerative agriculture. And some of the people that discovered this were really forced into it because of economics. It wasn't the universities leading us here. It was basically these people had crop disasters, and the bankers turned them down for loans, and they had to figure out how to survive. And they realized that what they had been doing, following the advice of the co-ops and the universities, wasn't working for them. The economics isn't there. Markets have collapsed to where there's just a few buyers and there's just a few sellers of inputs. And people have forgotten a lot of what our grandpas and great-grandpas knew for centuries, really. And so what we're trying to do with regenerative ag is something called biomimicry, just returning to the way nature evolved.
Rather than fighting Mother Nature, we're trying to work with her. The changes that we're seeing in soils, in soil health, is fantastic. And where we're standing right now is one of my gardens, and this is where I had onions planted. They were harvested, and I put down multiple kinds of seed. But this is amazing to me because it's not growing weeds, it's growing what I put here, what I want here. And it's feeding the soil and improving my soil health.
So there's probably, I'm thinking, half a dozen different plants growing here, and every single one of these plants feeds a different bacteria in the soil.
We're always learning, always learning. Old dogs can learn new tricks. And this year, we're doing a little bit of experimentation with how to make cover crops work the best. But we're also going to try putting down rye. And instead of using chemicals to weed the corn that we're going to put down, we're going to roll the rye down. We're going to crimp it and kill it without herbicides, and then plant our corn into that. So instead of having cover crops there that are going to be year long, those cover crops are actually going to help us go chemical free on our corn. And maybe we'll be back one step closer to being organic again. So always learning something new.
One of the things we try to do is not disturb the soil. We want to, when you disturb the soil, it's like you rip the skin off your body. Um, Nature has evolved over millions of years, this process, and it's hard to beat her science. So when we plant our crops, we plant them using something called no-till. And these are machines, planters, that come in and they plant with a very narrow slot and very heavy duty, lots of weight, and cuts into the sod, cuts into the soil, and deposits the seed. So you didn't have to tear it apart with discs and plows or rototillers. And that's important because in the natural world, plants will take 30 to 40% of the sugars they produce and they trade it to funguses, the mycorrhizae in the soil, which in turn trades that to bacteria. Mm-hmm. And the more you can restart this natural process, the better it is, because those bacteria and those funguses start to harvest and work on the raw rock mineral. There are tons and tons of potash and phosphate in the soil if the life is there to capture it and bring it back to the plant. So there's this network going on. If you come in with tillage, it kills the soil. You till the soil, you kill the soil. You just destroyed all the mycorrhizae. All of a sudden, the bacteria are exploding because they're feeding on that dead carbon from the mycorrhizae. It'd be like if you went through the forest with a 50-foot tillage instrument and you could see the wreckage that was there. So when you can get this natural process working again, you don't need to buy so many inputs. Nitrogen, potash, phosphate, calcium, all that stuff is mostly right in our soil. You can really reduce it, and that helps your bottom line.
It's all locked there for us to use.
So we're standing in a field that we just opened up for grazing, and here it is November, and we're still grazing our cattle. And we oftentimes will make some hay off of this, 1 or 2 crops of hay, and then graze it a couple of times. But in this pasture, or in this field, this is a mixture of probably 5 different types of grasses and several different types of clover and alfalfa and some forbs like chicory and plantain. And they all provide different nutritional needs for these cattle.
It's also very representative of a natural environment where it's not just corn, like across the road from us. It's not a monoculture. You have all kinds of things growing out here. And we've determined what most of it is by no-till planting.
Right. Because of their varied diet here, these cattle are much healthier. And our mineral mix, we feed kelp along with our minerals, and that gives them all the micronutrients that even some of the commercial mixes don't include. We haven't had a pink eye case on this farm in many, many years, and every year so many beef farmers are plagued by that. But it's because of the nutrition they get and the salts that they receive. Another thing about grass-fed beef is not only is the omega fat ratio better, but also there's a product in grass-fed beef called CLA, which is an incredibly powerful anti-carcinogen. And you won't get that in a commercial feedlot animal.
Another thing, the cattle that we have out here, we have selected these cows as our breed stock because they have smaller frames. They're not like the giant Holstein cows that you might buy at the meat market. They're smaller. They gain beautifully on grass. And we introduced a couple of years ago Murray Gray cattle into the herd. And we have a Murray Gray bull who's about the sweetest guy I know, and several several Murray Gray cows out there as well. So we've mixed genetics up a little bit, which helps them to gain and give us a better product. And they gain off the grass. And you plant things, soybeans, you put nitrogen back into the soil thanks to that plant.
Right.
You don't have to purchase it. It's not something we're finding that we're not using the inputs that we had in prior years. And it's pretty amazing. And the balance that comes back, it happens very, very quickly. The soil, it's all willing to heal very quickly given the chance.
And if you incorporate livestock, sheep and cattle into your operation, you'll amp up the soil biology like 2 to 3 times, because there's something about their hoof action and their manures. You know, that manure pile and urine, it's a bomb of bacteria, and it just gets the soil working so fast. Every time that cow bites that grass, whatever is lost on the top for the cow feeding is also lost in the ground. So now that plant has to rebuild the roots, and it has to feed the microbes down there again. So it is taking in a lot more carbon to produce those sugars than it would be if it was just laid without laying there and growing, like say land that is set in a reserve and never touched by a grazing animal. That soil kind of is inert and kind of dead. It doesn't really do a lot. But the great herds of buffalo, and elk out on the prairies, that's what built the 12 feet of topsoil down there. So every time, if you do regenerative ag without livestock, you can probably gain about a 1/10 to 1/1500ths of a point of organic matter in your soil. Okay, so that's about 900 to 1,000 pounds of carbon, actual carbon pulled out of the air, back into the earth, building up the soil. And if you have a rotationally grazed system, you're adding probably a 1/4 point of organic matter each and every year, if you do it right. Taking the grass from about 14 inches down to about 7 and letting it grow, having it have a rest period. If you do rotational grazing, we did it the wrong way for many years. And then we figured out, after attending some seminars that our Sauk County Planning, Zoning, Conservation Department put on and bringing in experts, we realized this is what we have to do. You have to move them frequently. We move our cattle twice a day usually, and it's the same concept as how the buffalo and the elk were pushed ahead by the predators, and they are always looking for that grass, letting the grass rest for a period of time. And it's a much more difficult system to manage than putting cattle on a lot, dumping a little bit of feed, or using your TMR to feed them. But you get a better quality meat, like they called it the omega-3, omega-6 ratio. So we're getting in that. You'll see the fat in those animals is yellow, not white like corn-fed, and that is because of all the beta-carotenes in the plants. And when you eat that type of meat, it's like you're eating salmon. I mean, it's that same concept. You don't get the clogged arteries and heart attacks, strokes, that sort of thing, and it's just a better meat for you.
Fairly soon, I mean, it's November right now, it's hard to believe it, but we're going to be taking hay that we've made all summer long and laying it out in a field. And we will place these bales
like 30 feet apart from each other.
In a grid, and we allow the cattle new bales every so many days, depending upon how cold it is and how fast they're eating. But when you see those bales laid out every 30 feet, just like a checkerboard, that's probably what's going on. And those animals are getting their nutrition from the soil that those farmers are working so hard to preserve.
So what we're trying to do is, instead of us having them contained on a feedlot or in a barn, what we're trying to do is get them out in their natural setting. That way their manure is distributed on the fields that maybe need a little bit more groceries, more nutrients. And instead of us having them on a lot where I have to
shovel,
clean it with the skid steer, put it on a spreader, haul it out, and that all takes fuel to do in time. The cows are doing this for us. So it's just a little more efficient. It's a lot. I'd rather move cattle with a poly wire type system into these paddocks than bring the feed all to them. It just takes so much more time and money to do that. They got 4 legs. They can go out and harvest their own food.
They're getting their exercise. They're getting their sunshine. They're getting this tremendous diet. And we always like to say that we try to give our animals the best life possible. And this is it.
If I was a cow, I'd want to be born here. No bull. Just like in nature, you just don't have deer in the woods. You have, many different species. So, here we have, we haven't had the pigs out following cattle. We haven't been that brave yet. But, we have a mobile chicken coop for our egg producers, and we have chicken tractors for our broilers. And they go out on pasture behind the sheep, and the sheep, hopefully, maybe next year we can get them to trail the
cattle.
The cattle. Right now the sheep are grazed rotationally just as well, but in a little different fashion, and we'd like to incorporate it so they track right behind.
Or possibly with the cattle, and that way predators aren't quite such a problem.
Exactly. And then maybe even at some point we could follow, or in that same mix we could run our laying hens with that herd, or a few days in back of that, because if you do it just a few days in back of the cattle, now you have fly larvae coming up in the cow patties, and the chickens will scratch through that, and our eggs.
I was just going to say, the eggs that for many years we had raised our hens in a hen house, and they got outside and I'd weed and give them all the weeds, and the eggs are fantastic. But since we've moved to our system where we're rotationally grazing the laying hens, the eggs are amazing. The yolks are orange, they're not yellow, and they taste incredible. And it's the nutrients that they're getting from the ground. We still grind our own corn, we grind our own feed.
Non-GMO corn.
And they get good groceries that way, but they are out scratching and eating. Grasshoppers are still hopping around out here. Not where the chickens are, though. They take care of them very quickly. Yeah, but those eggs are fantastic.
And they're so fresh. I mean, they're so fresh the hen is still saying ouch. So, in the summer, we will use this tool. This is a measuring stick. It gives us the calculation to determine how much feed we actually have out in these pastures. So we can kind of determine, are we going to have to sell some stock, or are we supplement our cattle, or are we going to be able to make some hay from the surplus feed? But this keeps is kind of a cool tool. You start grazing when it's actually quite tall. In the spring we'll probably start at 10 inches, but ideally you'd rather have it at 12 to 14 inches tall. But you only take half. You take half and you leave half. If you take more than that, it takes so much more time for that plant to recover.
It stresses the plant too much. The leaves are using photosynthesis and sunshine to feed the plant. And when you graze that too low, the growth stops or
Right.
slows considerably. So when we leave it at a relatively high level, the plant can recover much more quickly. Root systems are that much more healthy, and life goes on.
And the cool thing about it is too, versus just set stock where you just turn the cattle in, and they're like us. I mean, if they get in, they're going to eat the stuff that they like the best. It'd be like if all you had was apple pie to chew. Oh, you'd eat all the apple pie on that pasture first, and you'd eat so much of it that eventually you'd kill that plant, and then you might go on to your
Kale.
kale or something, or arugula, But if they're given smaller breaks of land, they kind of go in and they kind of get greedy. They're going to eat everything they have to, before somebody else gets it and they don't get anything. So it allows these plants to come back. Otherwise, they get wiped out, and pretty soon all you're left with is a patch of thistles.
And actually, still have a problem with Canadian thistles in a couple of pastures. And we've used the cattle to eradicate the thistle, and it's actually working.
Yeah.
By crowding them into a very small area for maybe 4 or 5 hours where the thistles are really thick, they will trample. Wouldn't feel very good if you had a 1,200-1,300 pound animal with those cloven hooves walking across you. So those thistles are having a harder and harder time coming back. The grasses that we want to grow there, the clover, that's coming back. And it's thanks to the cattle.
And the other thing about these Murray Greys that I've noticed is that they're such a durable little cow.
Yeah.
They will strip the leaves off of bushes and brush that the regular cattle will not touch, like multiflora rose. The calves will just strip the leaves right off of it, and you can reclaim some land that was lost to that instead of clipping it and stuff. So they're just a little more efficient animal.
Helping us manage things.
Right.
Makes it easier for us.
And also with those roots going down, when you have rain that comes down, our infiltration has just skyrocketed compared to what it used to be. The rainwater goes into the soil rather than runs off.
Some major rain events recently where we've gotten 5 inches of rain, and we look at our field and it's dry, muddy, but there's no standing water. And when we turn around and look at the other side of the road, there is standing water. That land has been cropped repeatedly, corn and soybeans, year after year after year after year. And they are losing land to cattails because it is so wet, and it can't sustain the impact of the rains.
So there's a thing called the dead zone down at the end of the Gulf, or at the end of the Mississippi River in the Gulf of Mexico, and then it is dead. I mean, there's nothing that is live there because there's so much phosphate and so much nitrogen that runs off of our fields. In a conventional system, you lose between 30 and 40%, maybe even more, depending on the year, of the fertilizer you're buying. It's like you just gave the co-op that money and it just went down the drain, literally down the drain. So when you have plants and cover crops that harvest it and store it back in the soil, you're keeping that for your next crop. There are so many reasons to do this. Every time that you increase your organic matter in the soil by 1%, you can retain 20,000 gallons of water per acre. I mean, so in a drought year, you're able to withstand those droughts.
Yep.
In a wet year, because of all that root mass and humus in the soil and better infiltration, you can access your fields faster.
We only have so many years of topsoil left. And when you look at the acres and acres and acres of conventionally grown land, it's really kind of terrifying. And I think 60 years is the number that I've heard, that we have 60 years of topsoil left. And we need to start changing these practices. We need to promote regenerative ag, save the topsoil, grow the topsoil, treat the land the way it needs to be treated.
If you really want to make an impact on the climate, look at buying local foods. And we don't have to send our feeder calves off to Nebraska to the massive CAFO feedlots to get finished, get slaughtered down there at a massive plant, and then get shipped back up here to be consumed. These animals are processed locally. They're raised on grass.
We work with our cattle. The rotational grazing that we do is been a game changer for us. For many years we raised beef cattle and we did it on a lot, and they were fed small amounts of grain and hay. And we've gone to grass-fed beef, which means they are out on our pastures, or right now they're out on cover crops, grazing. And they are having this tremendous positive impact on the land. We're getting a product from them that is a tremendous quality. And not only are the meats that we raise wonderful, the vegetables. When you think of vegetables that you buy from California at the grocery store or Mexico, they are sprayed. Think of all the times that we hear of warnings about bacteria counts and people getting sick because human waste was sprayed near a field of lettuce. When you purchase from somebody like us, from your local producer, you're getting food that is nutrient dense. Our soils are not depleted, they are not worn out. We feed them and allow them to feed themselves naturally. You're getting more nutrient dense food from a farm that practices regenerative agriculture.
And so much of our health today, whether it's obesity, diabetes, even some behavioral issues, and maybe some allergic things, probably are the result of the chemicals that are sprayed and maybe the lack of nutrients in the soil. You're going to eat. I can tell you, like, if you don't have the right mineral mix, the cattle will eat the plants until they satiate whatever they're lacking, whether it's copper or iron or whatever. And we're the same. We will eat and eat and eat because we crave that nutrient. But if you have, like our chicken, just a little piece of chicken, you feel satiated. It's just that much more dense. So I think there's many reasons to consider, if you're a consumer, looking at your local farms and supporting them. You're saving, your diet is improved, you're saving the planet too. Yeah, we're in a group called SWIG, the Sauk Soil and Water Improvement Group, and it's a group of like-minded farmers in this area, in this watershed, and we're trying to get other farmers interested in these practices. And this last year, of course, with COVID, it's been a challenge to have field days and seminars, but we're getting there, and there's more and more interest in this. The government in the last 2 years has subsidized farmers to the point of $60.4 billion. And farmers don't want handouts. What they want is a fair price for their products that they work so hard to produce. And they want to be able to make a profit and be sustainable, both on the environment and economically. And we've just got to figure out how to do it better. And this is also interlinked. If everybody switched to regenerative farming, we could sequester all of the carbon that is produced by industry and consumers. Every acre that we have here consumes about 300 gallons, the equivalent of 300 gallons of gas in the way of carbon. So you take that into account, and it's pretty exciting. Gabe Brown out in North Dakota, he farms 8,000 acres. There's a fellow named Clark down in Indiana farming 7,000 acres. And there are other farmers all the way in between. But to say it can't be done on scale, They make planters that are 30 feet wide, no-till planters that are 30 feet wide. The concept is the same. And the cool thing about this is, I don't care if you're in Jamaica or the Ivory Coast or Canada or Mexico, the same concepts apply. Maybe they can't grow the same cover crops that we have, or the livestock is different, but it's the same principles, the same 4 or 5 principles that we have.
And the idea that certain soils won't grow cover crops or work for regenerative ag is a fallacy.
Right.
There are all kinds of soil that are being used in regenerative ag, and they're finding tremendous success everywhere. It's amazing to see the difference it can make.